There's something about flying that most people don't think about. You get on a plane, you sit down, and you just assume someone is awake. Someone is flying it, someone is in control. It's not something you really question. You trust the process, you trust the people in the cockpit, and you just go. And that trust is usually right. But sometimes something happens that quietly breaks that trust without anyone even noticing. That's exactly what happened on a flight in January 2024. This was Batik Air Flight 6723, an ordinary flight from Kendari to Jakarta in Indonesia. It was an Airbus A320 with 153 people on board. A completely regular flight, no emergency, no bad weather, just a typical domestic route. Passengers were sitting comfortably, scrolling through their phones, maybe watching something, maybe sleeping, maybe just waiting for the next round of snacks. There was nothing about this flight that seemed unusual, and yet it became one of the most surprising stories in recent aviation. So here's what happened. The captain of the flight took a scheduled rest. This is allowed. On flights like this, pilots are expected to take turns resting so they can stay sharp for the rest of the journey. Nothing strange about that. The co-pilot, or first officer, was now in charge. What no one realized was that the co-pilot was deeply exhausted. He had just become a father to newborn twins, and like a lot of new parents, he hadn't been sleeping well at all. But this wasn't just tired. This was the kind of exhaustion where your body just stops cooperating. At some point during the flight, after the captain had gone to rest, the co-pilot accidentally fell asleep. Not a little nap, not a quick blink. He fully drifted off, and now the cockpit was completely silent. Both pilots were asleep. The plane was still flying, cruising at altitude, autopilot still doing its job, but no one was awake to monitor anything. And that's the moment that's so strange when you think about it. You have a plane in the air carrying over 100 people, and no one is awake at the front. For the next 28 minutes, the cockpit remained silent. Air traffic control was calling. Again and again, they tried to reach the flight. No response. The plane slowly started to drift off its assigned course. Not a sharp turn, not something passengers would feel. Just a quiet, steady drift that only someone on the ground would notice. Air traffic control kept trying. They called the pilots. Nothing. They called again. Still nothing. And meanwhile, the passengers were sitting there, completely unaware that for half an hour no one was awake in the cockpit. Eventually, the captain woke up. Maybe he just opened his eyes by chance. Maybe something in the system caught his attention. Maybe it was a natural shift. But he woke up, looked around, and realized the situation immediately. The co-pilot was still asleep. The plane had drifted off course. The radio had been silent the entire time. He quickly corrected the flight path, reconnected with air traffic control, and within minutes, everything was back on track. Soon after, the co-pilot woke up too. The plane continued to Jakarta, and the passengers probably never knew anything had gone wrong. From their perspective, it was just a normal flight. But what happened next turned this from a quiet mistake into a major safety investigation. Both pilots were immediately grounded. The authorities launched a full review. They found that the co-pilot's exhaustion wasn't properly reported, and the airline's rest policies, though technically allowed, didn't fully account for real-life situations like extreme sleep deprivation. Batik Air had to review its fatigue management system. The aviation authority in Indonesia ordered new steps to make sure pilots weren't just following rest schedules on paper, but actually getting the rest they needed in reality. What's interesting is that the plane's systems didn't flag this situation. There's no automatic alert for both pilots are asleep because the system assumes that can't happen. Autopilot doesn't know if the person in the seat is awake or not, and in this case, the only reason the flight didn't drift further off course or potentially into danger is because the captain eventually woke up. That's not a system catch. That's just chance. This story is strange because we often think of aviation risks in very dramatic terms. We picture engine fires, storms, mechanical failures, and emergency landings, but here, it wasn't a storm, it wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't even a complex human mistake. It was just exhaustion, just two people asleep. That's what makes this story stand out. It's quiet, it's not loud like a disaster. It's not a moment where alarms are going off. It's just a slow drift, a quiet gap that no one noticed until later. And that's what makes it dangerous, because most people sitting on that flight, would have never guessed that for 28 minutes, the people flying the plane were actually unconscious. There were no clues. There was no turbulence. There was no announcement. There was just trust. The trust that someone is awake and paying attention. And in this case, that trust was broken. Quietly, without anyone feeling it, the aviation industry took this incident seriously because it exposed a blind spot. Systems can track hours, checklists can verify rest periods. But what happens when the human sitting in that seat is still exhausted? What happens when fatigue pushes past the schedule? That's not something a checklist can always prevent. After this flight, airlines began tightening their fatigue policies, adding more reporting tools, and rethinking rest management, especially for pilots with known life stresses like newborn children. Some airlines introduced extra check-in procedures during autopilot, requiring pilots to respond at intervals to prove they were awake and alert. And honestly, what makes this story stick with me is that everything about it seems like it could have been just another ordinary flight. And technically it was. The plane took off, the plane landed, no one got hurt, no one noticed anything strange. But hidden inside that ordinary flight was a real safety threat. It's a reminder that danger isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the absence of attention. Sometimes it's just a moment, where no one is looking. And I think it's stories like this that really show how complex aviation safety is. It's not just about machines, it's about people. And no system is perfect if the people inside it aren't okay. We often assume that pilots are always alert, always ready, always sharp, but they're people. They get tired, they carry personal stresses, they sometimes push themselves beyond what's reasonable. And in this case, that nearly led to a major incident, but it didn't. It ended safely. And that's why it became a powerful lesson instead of a disaster. That's the story of the flight where both pilots fell asleep. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but it mattered. If you like this story and want to hear more, you can subscribe and follow along. I'm Clueless Avgeek, and thanks for spending your time with me. I'll see you in the next one.